kind of look forward to putting those down. Very nice. We are in the third message in our sermon series on Esther, and the title for this message is Right on Time. So if you can turn with me to Esther, the third chapter. I'm getting a little bit of feedback on this thing. Thank you. Esther, the third chapter, verses 7 to 15. Esther 3, verses 7 to 15. Thank you. Let's begin. In the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast Pur, P-U-R, pure Pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, There is a certain people scattered abroad, dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws, therefore it is not the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay you 10,000 talents. I think, what is this, $3.4 billion he was going to do, to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand, gave it unto Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, The silver is given to you, the people also to do with them as it seems good to you. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province, according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, in the name of King Ahasuerus or Xerxes, was it written and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for prey. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. The post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan, the palace, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan or Susa was perplexed. So if we were to understand take the whole issue that is going on here, Haman is a prideful man. He loves power. And he's got a problem with Mordecai because Mordecai doesn't want to bow down to him. Isn't it interesting that we have people in the world, not a lot of them, but there are people who love to be admired, adored, or even worshipped. If you would say, well, how do you see that? If you go on the internet and you type in a certain sports star's name, you'll get these websites where these kids have pictures of this guy plastered all over the room, shirts with his name on, everything. If he's got a box of cereal with his name on it, he's got it up on his dresser. He's got everything. I call that worship. I don't know how you would kind of look at that, and I think there's a lot of worship taking place. Well, this is what Mordecai wants. He wants worship. You bow down, Mordecai, because I am the prime minister. So he wants that respect. He wants that worship to take place. And it's unfortunate that we feel we need to have our thumb over people, have control over them. So Haman doesn't receive that, so guess what? I'm not only going to do away with this guy, I'm going to get rid of all his people too. And probably one reason for that is Haman the Agagite, if we're correct in that assumption, his ancestry goes back to the Amalekites, And of course, Saul wanted to destroy all the Amalekites that he could. Of course, this was God's directive too. He didn't want the Amalekites there to be destroyed. So Haman's laid down the gauntlet. I want all these people dead. And we've got the time. And if you allow me to go into that, according to the Benson commentary, let me just read this for you. They cast Pur, that is the lot. Haman, being determined to destroy Mordecai and the Jews together, called diviners to find out what day would be most lucky for putting this design into execution. The way of divination then in use among the Eastern people was by casting lots. Do you remember in another place where they cast lots? How about with Jonah? Who was the guy who was responsible for this storm? They cast lots and it came to Jonah. Therefore, having tried in this manner each month and then each day of the month, what they did is they would cast lots for this month. Let's say January. And then they started casting lots to find the day. And it's amazing because God was in the lots. Because he had to wait all the way to the end of the year, and they cast, and finally it came out in the last month of the year. So I believe God was casting those lots. I don't care what the people say. He had his way in all that was taking place. So they're casting lots. And finally, and you know what's interesting? You went by what the lot said. So finally it goes for the 13th day of the 12th month would be the most fortunate day for the bloody execution. So they cast lots until all of these dice or whatever they're using came into line. And it all came out 13th day of the 12th month. It was in the month of the year when Haman began to cast lots, and the time for the execution of the Jews was by these lots delayed till the last month of the year, which plainly shows that through the lot be cast into the lap, yet the whole disposing thereof was from the Lord. Proverbs 16:33, which is what I believe happened. So Haman put he was probably a very superstitious or religious man, if you put it that way. They cast the lots. He could have said, I'm doing it this day, but he was casting the lots. So it all fell out to the last month of the year. So I'd like to take just a step back away from here for a second. Let's go to John, the 11th chapter. We're going to get out of Esther for just a moment here. Let's go to John 11. He had the time. Haman had his time picked out. Everything's all ready to go. And you know, Haman can feel like, hey, I'm in charge of this. I'm in charge of what's going to be happening. I've got the king's permission. I'm the prime minister. And I have the power. Little did he know that he was coming across a God who owned time. My wife sometimes will say, can you give me a minute? Or she'll say something and I say, I don't have time to give you because it's not mine to give. But it's the same thing with Haman. Haman thought everything's in his control. He's got the king's power with the army. He's got the law. Everything is on his side. So he owns the time that the Jews are left. Can you imagine the Jews all of a sudden waking up one day and you're going downtown and you see a beautiful poster. Hey, that kind of looks like me. And you get up a little closer and it says, you're dead on this day and this month. Hey, I don't think I like that anymore. But can you imagine being told, your time is up? I think it's time to go on a vacation somewhere far away from this empire, real quick. So anyways, let's go to John, the 11th chapter, verses 17 to 21. John 11, verses 17 to 21. And this is dealing with Lazarus being sick and dying. Then when Jesus, he knew about this. He knew all that was going on. Then when Jesus came, he found that he had been laid in the grave already. We're talking about Lazarus dying. A messenger was sent. Lord, come quickly. The one you love, he's sick. Jesus goes nowhere. Can you imagine the disciples? What are you doing? How come you're not going? You love Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Why aren't you going? But Jesus does nothing. Can that be happening in our lives too? God, need a little bit of help here. I got a problem here, and we hear nothing from God. So this is what's happening here. Now Bethany was nigh to Jerusalem, about 15 furlongs, not very far, but he didn't go. And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary sat still in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother had not died. But now I know, we don't stop right there. So if he wouldn't have died, so what is Martha really saying to Jesus? You're late. When we needed you, you weren't here. His time is up. He's dead. He's gone. Right? This is what Martha's saying. But Jesus comes just at the right time. Why? Because Jesus had the perfect timing, not our timing. And a lot of times in life, we can think, God, I need your help now. So-and-so is sick. Would you come and heal now? I need to go to work. I can't be late. You get a flat tire and you say, why now? All our time that we have, we can have a wrong time, if you allow me to put it that way. And so this is what Martha's saying to Jesus. You're late. Where are you? You should have been here. And you know what makes me think of? Makes me think of Samuel. When he's coming after Saul has done the burnt offering, and as soon as Saul is finished, here comes Samuel, and Saul says to Samuel, you were late. And because you were late, I went and did the burnt offering already. I forced myself to do it. And Samuel said, you made a mistake. Why? Because we need to find out what is God's time. So, and you know what's another interesting point about this? In Jewish custom and law, you had to be dead at least 3 days to be considered legally dead. And so here comes Jesus on the 4th day. So they can't argue and say, hey, he may not have really been dead on the 4th day. And there are plenty of witnesses. So here comes Martha. Why weren't you here in time? Then later on we see Mary coming. Lord, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. But Jesus had a plan. And we need to realize that too. Sometimes when Jesus isn't answering us, he has a plan. Better plan than ours. So we can ask questions maybe, why didn't God just stop Haman in the middle of all this? Why did he just stop Haman right at the start? Why go through all of this? Because God had a perfect plan. Why didn't God stop Adam and Eve from making the wrong choice in the Garden of Eden? Because God has a perfect plan. Why did he put that tree there? And then we have to come back with 2 answers, and I've got those on your sermon outline. Why? And this is interesting. Why doesn't God answer us all the time we want to? Because then we have to start looking at God as a genie. Okay, God, I need you. Rub that little thing there, that little whatever it is. Genie comes out. What is it, Master? I want you to do this and I want you to do that. We need to understand that we serve a God that we are servant to, and not that he is servant to us. So number 1, the freedom of choice that God has given to man. Boy, I don't have this really short down here. But I'll just say the freedom of choice. He is a free moral agent. We are free to make our own choices, but not the circumstances that come with those choices. So why does God allow all this? Because he makes us free moral agents. We make choices. And sometimes those choices can have very bad circumstances. You know what I was thinking of? One reason? The time of the Amorites was not yet full. Do you remember that statement? Israelites did not come back into the land of Canaan, it says, until the time of the Amorites was full, because their sin that God was judging them for had a perfect time too. Number 1, God gives us freedom of choice. That's why God is right on time with us, and we don't understand. But there's sometimes that choices are made that have repercussions. Number 2, God has a perfect plan of redemption. Adam and Eve fall. And the first thing a lot of people say, well, then why didn't God send Jesus right then? Why not? And then redeem and then have no problems the rest of the time throughout the world, because God had a plan. We're not going to understand it till Jesus comes back, but God had a plan for all of this. It can be troublesome for us. There are many times in our lives in which God was working according to our schedule, but we need to realize God is the master and we are his servants. We're seeking God for help, but what happens when there's no response? And we're crying out to God. And I think of Job. Job is crying out, and during the book of Job we read, what is Job really after from God? I just want to talk to him. This is Job's plea. I just want to talk to him. But God had a perfect plan even with Job. On his time, God will make things right. And then when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son made of a woman, we're told in Galatians 4:4. God's perfect time. Our time, we'd mess up God's plans if we did it. But God has a perfect time. So let's go back to Esther 4, and let's look at this time issue. Esther 4, and we're going to go to verse 14. Esther 4 and verse 14. First of all, we realize that Haman has set a date. Haman set a date. Now let's go Esther 4, verse 14. Mordecai is talking to Esther, trying to encourage her and convince her she needs to go before the king. And I think Esther is a little bit worried about this, because if you come before the king's presence without permission, you can be put to death, because that was the law, unless he held out that golden scepter. But let's go to verse 14. And Mordecai is giving Esther a warning. If you altogether hold your peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And look at this now. And who knows whether you are come to the kingdom for such a time as this? God's perfect timing. Isn't there times we are going through suffering and we're saying, God, why aren't you answering now? Because maybe there are times that God wants us to learn through suffering patience and trust in the Lord. So Mordecai is saying to Esther, now is the time. Now is the time for you to act. Not before. There was a perfect time for Esther to act, and Mordecai says, now it's time for you to do that. So let's go to verse 16. Let's go to 15. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also my maidens will fast likewise, and I will go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So she sets a time, 3 days and 3 nights. 3 days and 3 nights. You fast with me. Let's seek God and put this towards him. Makes me think of Jesus. The Son of Man shall be in the heart of earth 3 days and 3 nights. A time appointed. Jesus is coming back soon. That day has been appointed. You can't hurry up that day, and you can't delay that day. A time has been appointed. And we're looking forward, and a lot of us would say, Lord, this world is getting ugly with the sin. Why don't you come now? It'd be a good time to come. But the day has been appointed. So we need to realize here for Esther, the day was appointed for her to fast and then to go in before the king. Now, what are we supposed to do if God is not answering us according to our timetable? I'm going to give you 3 things we can do. Number 1, what can we do? Esther did it. Prayer and fasting. You fast and pray for me. We're going to fast and pray 3 days and seek God's grace and God's face in heaven that he will answer us. So if you're going through a trouble in your life and you're not hearing God, prayer and fasting. Seek him out. Jesus said, and there's other ones, when you seek the Lord, you will find him. Seek him with all your heart, you will find me. Number 2, trust. We need to trust that even though, I look back at Saul, and Saul just pushed himself to do something that Samuel said, you spoke foolishly, and you acted foolishly. We need to wait on God and allow God to show us what he's going to do. So, number 1, prayer and fasting. 2, we need to trust that God has this in his control. The world may look like chaos, but we need to trust God that he's going to look after us throughout this. And number 3, continue walking in peace even in a chaotic world. So just keep being faithful with what you're supposed to be doing. He doesn't answer a lot of times the way we'd like him to answer, but you know what? God has our best interest at heart. We would like to have him work on our schedule. We need to realize that it is his. So let's continue back on with Esther, the 6th chapter, verses 1 to 3. Now, for us, we're just reading this, but to the Jews, time is running out. Every day is another day closer to their extinction. Can you imagine them all sitting there? What are we going to do? Because how can you stop a king who's already given the date of your execution? So Esther 6 verses 1 to 3. On that night could not. Now here is the beauty of this. When God puts this all together, Esther could not, Mordecai could not have fixed this. But God could fix it. On that night could not the king sleep. Esther 6 verses 1 to 3. And he commanded to bring the book of records of their chronicles, and they were read before the king. Can you imagine anything more boring than that? Maybe he just wanted so he could go back to sleep. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor and dignity has been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, there's nothing done for him. The perfect time for him to act. He gets Ahasuerus' attention. All right, something's going on here. And isn't it interesting to me? It's like reading the newspaper the second time over, third time over. Why do you want it? But because God had a plan. And that was the perfect time. Now let's go to Esther, the 8th chapter, verses 8 and 9. We're going through these, picking out different places where the timing is there. You know, when you were saved, that was God's perfect time. When you came to Jesus, God planned that day out for you to be saved. Of course, we can say Jesus, when he died on that cross, was the perfect time. And for each person in history who's come, it's been at God's perfect time. His is the day of salvation. Esther 8, 8 and 9. Write ye unto the Jews, as it likes you, in the king's name. Now let's stop there. We've got the date set, the 13th day of the 12th month. All Jews are supposed to be exterminated. Now God in his time answers Haman. In the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, for the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may not no man reverse. So the execution date is done. You can't change that according to the law of the Medes and Persians. So something else has to take place. Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof, and it was written according to all the Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, to the deputies, to the rulers of the provinces which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces. Can you imagine? Is it UPS or FedEx you're going to go with and get this message out? You're going to have to go in a hurry, because there are some places that are a long way you're going to have to go. Unto every province according to the writing thereof, and according to the people after the language, and to the Jews according to their writing, and according to the language. So why am I bringing this out? Because God had given enough time for these messengers to go out and for the Jewish people to be saved. Can you imagine if Haman had said, okay, in 2 weeks we're going to do this? But there was enough time, because the lots were cast so late in the year, there was enough time for the messengers to go back out into all the empire and to tell the Jews, you can defend yourself. Because God made it according to that time. So, we go back to Galatians 4, verse 4. When the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman. God acts in perfect time. Jesus didn't come any later, any sooner, but according to God's time. Now let's turn to Psalms 31, verse 15. Psalm 31, verse 15. Now I had some scriptures in there that I am not going to use that are on your sermon note list, so you'll just grant me grace for that. Psalms 31, verse 15. And here is something that David is saying that we all need to take notice of. My times are in your hand. Did you get that? My life, all that I am doing, God sees that. But you know what? God is working through all my good days and all my bad days to bring me home to his kingdom. Perfect timing. So, my times are in your hand. Deliver me from the hand of mine enemies and from them that persecute me. Why can he say that? Because you know God's taking care of him. God's perfect timing. There's a song I'd like to read out for you this morning. And it goes like this. First time round the walls of Jericho, Israel must have thought this victory's coming much too slow. But God commanded march 6 times around. Then seventh day, see the walls come down right on time. Right on time. If you're waiting on the Lord, keep waiting and you'll find he's right on time. If it looks like no one cares, in a matter of prayer, you'll find him standing there right on time. News came down the road from Bethany. Lazarus lay there dying. Lord, come quickly was their plea. But Jesus had a plan not known to man. 4 days passed, Lazarus dead. Then the Lord came in right on time. Right on time. God saves us right on time. Is there anything greater than knowing God is looking after us? And Jesus is coming back right on time.